And can you go to the next slide, Dawn? Okay, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. We have our quorum, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Our first agenda item is to approve the meeting minutes from last month's meeting. Do I have a motion for approval? Looks like Dawn, and do I have a second? And I can't see everyone's face, so if...
I second your motion.
Okay, I see a couple people have, so all in favor? Okay, any opposed? Okay, motion approved. And next, this is the agenda. So do I have a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting?
I make a motion to adopt tonight's agenda.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, and all in favor? I'm going to take that as everyone, and so the agenda is approved. Can you go to the next slide, please, Dawn? The next slide. Okay, so due to the health situation that our community is currently experiencing, the May 19th Racial Equity Committee meeting will take place via teleconference. Should anyone wish to provide public comment, please send an email that includes your full name to fcpsracialequity@fcps.org. Prior to the start of the meeting, the Racial Equity Committee welcomes and encourages public comment. Public comments will be read for up to 30 minutes. However, all public comment, whether read or not, will be posted to board docs within 24 hours of the meeting. Please note that public comment is for statements and questions will be directed to the appropriate staff for response. And let me pull this up. Okay. Dear members of the Racial Equity Committee, I write to you to express my concern regarding two items contained in tonight's agenda. And just as an FYI, this was received the evening of our last meeting, so the agenda items that are being referred to are from last meeting. One, the apparent proposal to review the dress code and bullying policies to provide recommendations for disciplinary actions that might be taken for the display of the Confederate flag, as highlighted in the next steps and action items for the School Climate and Discipline Subcommittee. And two, the proposal to include additional definitions, e.g. racism, anti-racism, cultural proficiency, as highlighted in the proposed policy revisions for the Culturally Sensitive and Inclusive Curriculum and Instruction Committee. First, let me begin by stating that while I have no affinity towards the Confederacy or Confederate symbols, I'm concerned about the implications of punishing students for the display of the Confederate flag or other Confederate symbols under the guise of the dress code or bullying policy, and what such actions may portend in the future. I'm concerned that punishing students who choose to display a Confederate flag or symbol may lead to similar actions being taken in the future with respect to symbols entirely unrelated to the Confederacy, such as certain religious symbols or other paraphernalia, certain logos or slogans deemed to be volatile of some future orthodoxy. This is particularly concerning in light of the current Supreme Court precedents regarding student speech rights. In Tinker et al. Versus Des Moines Independent Community School District et al. 393 U.S. 503, 1969, the Supreme Court of the United States addressed a situation whereby a small group of high and middle school students decided to wear black armbands to school to protest the United States military involvement in Vietnam. The school district learned of the planned protests and enacted a policy restricting the students' ability to wear the armbands. Nevertheless, the students showed up at school dressed with the black armbands and refused orders to remove them. The students subsequently were suspended and sent home. The Supreme Court held that it can hardly be argued that either students or teachers shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. The court also stated that it was relevant that the school authorities did not purport to prohibit the wearing of all symbols or political or controversial significance. The court stated that the school officials could not restrict the students' speech, at least if it could not be justified by a showing that the students' activities would materially and substantially disrupt the work and discipline of the school. Thus, the court upheld the silent, passive protest from the students as a constitutionally protected form of speech. I'm concerned that the proposed review of the dress code and bullying policies will fail to take into account a student's right to exercise constitutionally protected speech, even if we may find that particular subject of such speech to be offensive or to promote a concept with which some or most people may not agree. For this reason, I implore the School Climate and Discipline Committee to exercise caution as it embarks on its review of the dress code and bullying policies. Second, I wish to address the proposal by the culturally sensitive and inclusive curriculum and instruction subcommittees to include additional definitions to policy 444, educational equity and excellence. While I'm happy on an individual level to stand against acts of racism, I'm concerned by the growing adoption of certain neo-racist language and policies under the guise of anti-racism. To begin, the use of the word equity itself is a fascistic term, which seems harmless on its face because of its similarity to the word equality. However, equality and equity could not be more different. The former stands for equality of opportunity, whereas the latter stands for equality of outcome. Indeed, the non-discrimination, equity, and cultural proficiency policy from the Board of Education of Montgomery County cited favorable as a sample that provides a useful starting point to craft a similar policy, states that equity demands intensive focus and attention to eliminate all gaps in student achievement, emphasis added. Such a statement should be frightening to all. While the goal of closing any achievement gaps among various student groups is a noble one, the fact of the matter is that individual students are inherently unique and different from their peers. They are endowed with their own inherent abilities, and they will make individual choices, some of which may help or hinder their performance in the classroom. A school policy that demands the elimination of all gaps in student achievement in the name of equity is nothing short of a form of fascism, because equity necessarily requires equality of outcome. Thus, any policies from the FCPS board imposed on teachers and school administrators that demands equality of outcome in student achievement will necessarily carry to force of the state to require that such teachers and administrators eliminate all gaps in student achievement in the name of equity. I implore the Racial Equity Committee to abandon its pursuit of policies seeking equity and instead pursue policies that will further equality. Respectfully submitted, Christopher Clark. That is the only public comment for this evening, so we can move on to the next agenda. The next slide, please, Dawn. Okay, and today I want to welcome our special guests, some students from the Brunswick High Minority Essence Club. They presented to the executive board last month. They did a fantastic job summarizing a project they did to get data from their peers on sort of their experiences regarding racial equity in FCPS schools. As well as took a review of some of the policies that our committee is also looking at. So we thought it was definitely worthwhile to have the whole committee hear their presentation, and we definitely wanted it to be coming from them rather than us. And so I thank them for taking the time to come here for us today, and I'm going to turn things over to Ariel.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having us today. So I guess we'll just introduce ourselves real quick. So I'm Ariel. I'm one of the co-presidents of Minority Essence. And I've been working with our group on this policy change project since probably last November or like January of this year. And yeah, I go to Brunswick High School. I'm a senior. And I'm very proud of all the work that we've done this year. Gabby, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, my name is Gabrielle Williams, but I go by Gabby. I go to Brunswick High School. I've been there for 3.5 years. My family moved to Brunswick about 4.5 years ago. Or no, yeah, 3.5 years ago. And I'm the other co-president of Minority Essence. And as Ariel said, I'm extremely proud of what we've been able to accomplish this year, and excited to share what we have to say to you guys tonight. Angela, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'm Angela Miller. I am a junior at Brunswick High School. I've been on Minority Essence and the Policy Change Project starting this January, and I'm a new member of the Racial Equity Committee, so I'm very excited to see and meet everyone here tonight. Jacob, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jacob Winter. I'm a sophomore at Brunswick. I've been in Minority Essence since the beginning of this school year, and I've been on this project since around December, January. And yeah, I'm excited about what we've accomplished and grateful for this opportunity.
Okay, so I'm just going to present my screen, and I'm also going to be putting a link of a folder that we have with a bunch of resources in it that we will be referencing. Can everyone see it? Okay, cool. So this is the folder that I have here. I'm just going to copy the link real quick. Okay, so in this folder, we have pictures from a project, our brochure project that we will be referencing later. This PDF documentation of pretty much everything we've accomplished within the last 2 years. Our meeting from last time, our presentation for today, they're pretty much the same thing. So, and then a link to our website. And then this document, this policy change meeting documents, we will be referencing a lot in the presentation. So if you'd like to open it up so you can kind of see what we're talking about, that would be great. And we also ask that you hold questions till the end. We'd be happy to answer anything, but we just kind of want to get through it first, and then we'll answer questions. So yeah, thank you guys for meeting with us today. I'm just going to be talking a little bit about the background of our club. So this is our mission statement for Minority Essence. Our club was created to foster the differences and individuality of students in our school by creating an environment where minorities feel safe and equal, and by creating a culture that recognizes, respects, and unites every race and ethnicity while celebrating their cultures. So Minority Essence has kind of existed at our school on and off within like the last 8 or 10 years, as far back as it goes. But ever since Gabby and I have kind of been on the leadership team, we've been trying to get it going strong again. Like I said, Angela and Jacob are on our leadership team, and Gabby and I are the co-presidents. And this mission statement is really important to our project specifically because we noticed kind of inconsistencies within our school's environment and our vision for our school. There's not very much diversity in our school, which is obviously something we can't control. However, we can control the environment of respect in our school, and we lack respect towards minorities, and we lack safety for minorities, and minorities in general just don't feel included in our school. So that's kind of what led us to start this survey project that we'll be referencing later on in the presentation. Was we kind of wanted to know, like, are students from other schools feeling the same way, or is this just a Brunswick specific issue? So that's why we wanted to get a wider reach on this. And after analyzing the data from our survey, we were kind of able to break down the problems into 4 basic categories. So first being a lack of awareness of racism, discrimination, and intolerance of racial and ethnic minorities. This is lack of awareness of racism for teachers as well as students, minority and non-minority students. People just don't really know that racism is an issue in our school as big as it really is, and it's often looked over, which leads to the next problem of lack of response from teachers and administrators. It's not being handled properly for whatever reason. That was just made apparent from the results we got in the survey and the comments we received. And then these next 2 kind of go together. So the lack of representation in the school and the lack of responsibility of the school. Really, there's no accountability for any incidents that happen, at least in our school, because there's no responsibility taken, and there are no representative statements of what our school is going to do to respond in those situations. So we'll go into more detail on those later, but I'm going to pass it over to Angela and Jacob to talk about our survey findings.
All right, thank you, Ariel. So, a little bit of background on our survey. We created it in November as a starting point for this policy change project. And within the 3 months that the survey was open, we've received over 400 responses. We spread the survey completely through social media, obviously, because of COVID. But that allowed us to reach more people. We specified FCPS students only and those who attended FCPS within the last 4 years. We didn't ask for racial or ethnic demographics, but we received responses from 10 out of 11 FCPS high schools, as well as various middle schools, but it was mainly high schoolers.
So the first question that we asked, which sort of goes along with the issue of lack of responsibility and representation, was, have you ever seen a printed statement regarding the FCPS policy on racism anywhere in your school? And the overwhelming majority of respondents, 83.1%, said no, they had never seen a printed statement regarding FCPS's policy on racism and racial incidents within their school. And only 13.4% said that they had. So there's a widely distributed tangible form of this policy will embolden students to report racial incidents, racist incidents, and will set clear expectations for both students and staff as to these situations.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So additionally, there's a lack of awareness of racism in the school system. So the first question we have here is, have you ever heard someone use a racial slur at your school? And 90.7% of respondents said, yes, I have heard someone use a racial slur at my school. Additionally, 62.9% of students have said that they have witnessed racial discrimination within their school. And if we compare that to how teachers and administration are perceiving the racist situations at our school, there's definitely a discrepancy that needs to be acknowledged and amended.
So going along with lack of awareness as well, if you are a person of color, have you encountered any form of racism at your school, such as profiling, stereotyping, discrimination, slurs, etc.? So this 67.1% of respondents you see in orange put non-applicable if they were a person of color. So out of the people who responded saying that they were people of color, 82.3% of students said that they had encountered racism within FCPS, and many included personal anecdotes.
So additionally, there's a lack of teacher or administrative response. 60.6% of respondents said they didn't feel comfortable reporting a racial incident. They didn't think it would be handled appropriately. And 37.7% said they feared retaliation over reporting a racist incident.
The question we posed was, would you like to see change be made regarding education and handling of race and diversity in FCPS? And once again, an overwhelming majority said, yes, we would like to see this change. And then a smaller percentage said, I think we need to at least talk about it more. So clearly, students feel that this is an issue that needs to be handled. And also many other students responded with personal statements echoing this sentiment.
So to kind of summarize those results, essentially we deduced that there's a cyclical effect within FCPS where students aren't reporting racist incidents, whether they fear retaliation, whether they think it's not going to be handled right, and therefore administration is unaware of the racist issues, and then administration can't or doesn't handle the situations appropriately, and then that loops back around to students thinking, well, if I report this, nothing's going to happen, or something's going to happen to me, so then they don't report, and it goes back around.
So after we went ahead and analyzed the survey findings, we decided to look deeper into where the issue really stemmed from, because we realized it's not just starting within the school, but beyond that. So then we decided to start looking into FCPS policies and how they were contributing to the problem. So we're going to go over next our issue with these policies. So the first policy is policy 437, the bullying, harassment, and intimidation policy. And inside both this policy and Policy 309, racism falls under the category of bullying, harassment, and intimidation. And the issue is that bullying is defined as something or an action that happens on multiple occurrences, which then leads to less reporting of something that happened one time or the student's first offense. It's also vague about what is considered racism and discrimination. It's just bullying or harassment or intimidation in race, and then it continues with other things as well as gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, but being grouped like that leaves a lot of generalization, and it really undermines the big issue of racism and discrimination in FCPS. So our next issue is in Policy 309, the Discrimination and Harassment Policy. So according to Policy 309, SCPS students may file a complaint of discrimination or harassment using the linked form within SCPS Regulation 400-48 bullying, harassment, and intimidation complaint process for students, as well as it being linked on the website in a fillable format. So whenever particularly me and Ariel went to talk to teachers about and administration about these issues that we were having, that other students were having, this information was not immediately given to us. It's not something that's talked about often enough. It's not something that is made available to their students. So students feel unable to report because they don't know where to report. It's not somewhere where it can be easily found very quickly. And if it's not talked about, students don't know where to go or what to do next. And then continuing, the fact that there's no separate form for racism or racial incidents is a part of the problem, similar to the fact that racism and discrimination is not defined separately from bullying, harassment, and intimidation. FCPS definition of bullying implies that there must be a pattern of those incidents, but if there isn't a pattern, what is there to do and how do administration and teachers handle it? And racism and bullying are not the same on any level, just like sexual harassment and bullying are not the same. And in FCPS policy, sexual harassment has a different category and is explained in a completely different way than bullying. And then finally, our last policy or regulation is Regulation 400-08, which is the discipline regulation. So as you know, as I just stated, you can report racial incidents or racism in the bullying and intimidation / harassment and intimidation forms. However, in the form of discipline, there are two different tracks: the bullying and intimidation track, which does not include tier 1 disciplinary action, which is very much more focused on first time offenses, the warnings, quick, not as heavy of a consequence as tier 2 or tier 3, where harassment and intimidation does include that. However, racism does not fall into that. And the issue with there being two different tracks is that it really makes administration not, it's unclear what administration is supposed to do. Where do they put certain instances? Do they put it in bullying and intimidation? If the student didn't do enough to warrant a tier 2 or tier 3 offense, then do they put it in harassment and intimidation? But that doesn't really define the issue. So if you go to the next slide, this is very vague and it leaves way too much up for interpretation by administration and teachers, which then can lead to mishandling of said racial situations or deterring from disciplinary actions because administration has a lot going on. They don't exactly have the time, or it might not be on the top of their list to go and figure out, okay, exactly how do we discipline a student, because it's not given in a very clear and concise way.
So now that we've kind of gone over some of our major issues with the current policy, we're just going to explain some of our proposed solutions and how we think we could easily fix some of these issues. So first, creating a racism policy. FCPS needs to create an entire policy devoted to specific issues involving racism and discrimination, definitions of important terms like stereotyping, profiling, etc., and stating a zero tolerance policy as well and what that means. We break these specific terms down, especially the zero tolerance policy, in our documents that are in the folder for this meeting. So if you want to find more specific details on that, I'd definitely look in those documents. But the reason this is so important is so that we can hold the school accountable and ensure that responsibility is taken if we have a specific policy for racism. Like Gabby was saying, it's just too vague without it. It's not bullying. It's not harassment in the sense of that's all it is. And so it just needs to be separated. And then next we have creating an accessible racism reporting form. So FCPS needs to create a form specifically for discrimination and racial incidents that is easily accessible to students and teachers in schools and online. Each school should have a physical way to report incidents so that they are documented and so administrators know what's going on. One of my biggest problems with grouping it into a bullying form was the availability of that form. Many students don't know that if they're going to report one of these forms, they need to go under the bullying subcategory because there is no other way to access the form from what I could tell on the website other than through the bullying category. So, and it's also labeled as the bullying reporting form. So there's like, if you didn't know that there wasn't a separate form, you wouldn't know how to get there. And I definitely would not expect there to be separate forms personally. So I know, and also like talking to other students, they had no idea that that's the route you're supposed to go if you have a racial incident. And again, like without any form of reporting, it's just kind of like on a he said, she said basis. Administration doesn't hold themselves accountable or hold the school accountable, hold the students accountable, just because there is no written documentation of anything, at least in our school. And then finally, we thought it was really necessary to define racism in the context of discipline. So FCPS needs to make an addition to the discipline policy that gives racism and discrimination its own category and breaks down the levels of offenses into different tiers. So basically, if there's no set plan to follow and everything is just left to interpretation, as Gabby was saying, situations generally are not handled properly because teachers are not equipped as to how to handle these situations. And students, this is also important because students need to know that there will be specific consequences to their actions. But I think the most important reason that we need to have racism as its own category in the discipline policy is because without defining racism and specifically stating which behaviors are racist, which consequences will be applied to these racist behaviors, students are not learning that their behavior is racist. And it's being labeled as bullying or harassment, which is a disciplinary action, but it is extremely important that we label racist behavior as racism, because without it, we're just never going to be able to expect change from this racism because no one's going to be aware that their behavior is racist.
So just to summarize, initially we began this project with other ideas in mind about how to address racism in FCPS schools. But after conclusively reviewing current FCPS policy and sorting through our student responses, it is clear to us that the change needs to begin with modifying outdated and/or inefficient policies to address the situation. In order to fulfill the goal of creating a secure learning environment for students of all races, it is imperative that FCPS policy, reporting procedures, and disciplinary responses effectively battle racism. By clearly defining and addressing the issue of racism in FCPS schools, we can shift the focus back to curricula and allow students of color to share an equal learning experience with their white peers without racially motivated attacks interfering with their education.
So now I'm going to go over other projects that Minority Essence has been able to accomplish in the last 2 years. It's something that we are really proud of, and we're excited to share how our efforts and what we've particularly done with very little adult help. We've had many, like our club advisor has been great through this entire process, and other members in the central office as well. But as a whole, Minority Essence, the club as students, has completely been able to accomplish so many things. So our project kind of started really last year. So in 2019 through the 2020 school year, we had our Heritage Month. So for each month that is associated with a culture represented in our club, we created announcements, physical bulletin boards with pictures, facts, and created social media posts to spread this awareness. And we also had morning announcements that we did almost every other day, depending on the month. Then we also had the 2019 Minority Essence Soul Food Luncheon. So this is where we celebrated Southern food, soul food, food from particularly the Black and African American community. And we had it right before Thanksgiving to raise funds for future projects, and we had a great turnout. A ton of students were trying to get in afterwards because they realized that they missed out. And then we also had the 2019 Santa's Workshop. So we had a booth at the BHS annual Santa's Workshop, along with many other clubs, and we taught kids how to make the Spanish ornament called Ojo de Dios, meaning Eye of God. In 2020, we had our staff meeting, and this was the first real opportunity we had to talk to this complete or almost complete staff of Brunswick itself. Before schools closed, we spoke about our personal concerns and gave many personal stories about the racism and discrimination in our particular school. Then, after the COVID shutdown, we had our virtual Heritage Month. So basically, we just did everything that we were doing, but made it virtually. So we put all of our bulletin boards on our websites. We created videos and we posted on our social media, as well as created morning announcements for our principal to state on our digital morning announcements. And then the 2020 National Archive virtual event. So this year we attended an event called the National Archives Foundation History Speaks, Race and Reform in America. Guest speakers like Ibram X. Kennedy and Soledad O'Brien were two of the panelists, and attending was a huge honor. It gave so much information and really just confirmed and reaffirmed our mission and what we needed to do. And then in November of 2020 to January 2021, as we've already stated, one of our biggest projects this year was our survey titled Handling Racism in FCPS. And then these are all projects from this school year. So we got a grant from the MSEA, the Maryland State Education Association, which funded many of our projects this year. With this money, we were able to purchase our own website domain, fund our book project, and fund our anti-racism pamphlet project. This year, we also tried to create a support group. We worked very tirelessly and for a very long time to get a support group for minorities up and running in Brunswick, with the responsibility and the accountability being on Brunswick, not as connected to Minority Essence, but BHS Minority Support Group. And the main goal of this group was to provide a safe place for minorities to discuss their experiences and to provide resources for minorities on, racial situations or just questions that we had that we didn't know exactly where to get the answer from. Then we also created our anti-racism brochure. So in December, we created a guide to anti-racism in the classroom for teachers that gave a step-by-step plan for handling racism in different situations, defined racial terms, suggested ways to diversify the learning environment, and gave suggestions on what not to do. In February, the FCTA, Frederick County Teacher Association, funded a reprint so we could spread them to other schools inside the county, and they completely paid for it and were able to put them in their mailboxes. Then, with some of our grant money, we ordered 15 physical copies of the book stamped Racism, Anti-Racism, and You, a remix of the National Book Award winning Stamped from the Beginning by Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kennedy, to start a reading challenge among teachers and students. And many of our teachers have had this book. I also have a copy and have been reading it. And then lastly, actually penultimately, I was on a Black Lives Matter Week of Action student panel for the FCPA during Black History Month that we spoke on personal experiences. We actually created questions and then answered them to about, I think, 55 or plus participants. And we brought up important topics that were often glossed over in our schools, and many teachers and administrative staff were present, as well as parents and other students. And then obviously our last project this year was this project, our policy change and reform project, where we were able to get in touch with you guys and central office and really get our message out there and to show how much this issue is pertinent to what is going on right now in our world, in our school system, and how we can affect change and change that.
Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to our presentation. At this time, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask them.
Hi, this is Tia. I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. I just want to say I am really amazed and impressed with all of the work that your club has done since 2019. That's a lot of projects that you guys have completed, and it sounds like it's really been the students carrying the water on these projects. So bravo to the work that you're doing, as well as the way that you are educating yourselves and your fellow students, as well as the teachers and administration, because that's so key. There are so many issues related to racism that people just don't have the awareness of. So I think that's excellent.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Hi. Hi. I'm new to this committee, so I also want to really commend you for a job well done. I mean, you guys have just presented. I'm so impressed by all of the work that you've done and how you've articulated your project's goals and sort of out deliverables essentially from the past 2 years. I had a question about the survey. I think I heard you mention that in some cases you found that administrators were not handling complaints about racism and discrimination appropriately. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about how you might go about assessing their ability, competency, whether you thought it was just the absence of a policy statement about this that sort of hindered their abilities to appropriately address, or whether you thought that there might be some opportunity for further training on recognizing, even if it's not reported, but recognizing and addressing it. I just wanted to know what your thoughts were about that.
Yeah, so Gabby and I have definitely been pushing for more professional learning in this subject, I guess. Mostly that was kind of the point of our staff meeting last year, was to talk to them about it. We kind of got the impression that we wouldn't be able to take it anywhere because there's only so much time allowed for, like, built into teachers' contracts and everything. So we kind of got stuck at a dead end there. But yeah, we definitely think that there needs to be more learning, especially like for teachers and administration, specifically in areas of how to handle it. Because like, I wouldn't know the first thing about, like, what am I supposed to say in this exact situation, you know? So I think having more training about that would be extremely important. Also training, or just some sort of way to introduce like neutrality, I guess, to teachers. So an issue that we often feel when reporting things is that it's usually like if a minority reports something to a non-minority teacher, there's this sense of like, well, what did you do? Like, how did you, like, this didn't just happen to you. You must have provoked them in some way. So there's always that setup dynamic when you come in. There's never just like a neutral base that you can just put everything that happened on the table and say, like, this is what happened to me, because there's a little bit of implicit bias incorporated in that sometimes, or just the idea that the way that they learn how to handle conflicts might not apply to racial incidents the same way it would apply to other issues. Gabby, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to add on to what you said, I think it's also important that the learning and the education comes from other adults, comes from higher up, because we found that it was difficult for administration sometimes to hear our voice if we weren't very, very like up and behind them, going to multiple meetings a week, making sure that this didn't just get put on the back burner. My parents had multiple meetings with the administration, so they had, an adult voice. But it's also just not the student's responsibility to educate exactly and on the level that the education is needed. It's really important that they take responsibility to do that themselves. A thought or a saying we got often was, well, how would you suggest, or what would you want us to do, or stuff like that. And while that's important to know, to understand how students feel supported, it's also important that it's less of a you tell me what to do and more of a let me go find a way or what I need to do to change this. So yeah.
Hi. Ivania also had her hand raised for a question.
Thank you. I didn't even realize I had my hand raised. But I do have a question on, I know that you guys collected over 400 responses, which I think is amazing, first of all. Secondly, I guess my main question is, and if you don't know this, that's totally fine too, but I'm curious if you guys disaggregated that information at all by schools. Like, were you able to pull it out by schools and see which schools had higher rates of, racism or whatever they were feeling in terms of your response? Did you guys break it down by school? And if so, I'm interested in hearing specifically, what is it like at Brunswick? Because Brunswick is one of those schools that I guess I don't immediately think about. So I'm interested in seeing if you guys looked into that data a little bit more.
So before we even put our survey out, our first route was to try to get our school to help promote it, and try to get other schools to help promote it. However, after talking to our administration, they said that they could not, because of the subject matter and the, I guess, implied questioning of the board and other FCPS things. We didn't fully understand exactly what that was, but that's when we were like, okay, well, I guess we'll just completely do this through social media. So yeah, we completely promoted it through social media. And then but because of that, where we were trying to get it promoted through the school, we made giving the school your school name optional, because we didn't want any type of uncomfortability or reason for administration to be like, oh, we can't ask that, so no. It didn't end up really mattering, but after the fact, we had a number, I think it's about 90 to 97, almost 100 students who did give their schools. 34 of them were from Brunswick, 14 were from Walkersville, 10 were from Oakdale, 18 were from Thomas Jefferson High School, 7 were from Urbana, 5 from Middletown, 5 from Tuscarora, 3 from Linganore, and 1 from Frederick. So the only school we did not get responses from was Catoctin. And then we can't exactly analyze fully, based off of that information, what schools have more racial situations or incidences just because there's just not a big enough sample size, and that's not exactly how we collected the data for information about the school. But I will say, and Ariel can also elaborate on this, Brunswick is very difficult when it comes to racial minorities. The school is predominantly white, so that's something that I had to, it was a big culture shock for me moving from a very diverse county. I used to live in Anne Arundel County. And that the staggering difference in racial minorities versus white people it was very difficult not having one black teacher, and not having a black guidance counselor until 2 years ago was a culture shock. We only had one Latina teacher teaching Spanish. The other two teachers were white. And that was very difficult. Ariel and I have experienced personally multiple accounts of discrimination and racism particularly for me, for my hair. I have naturally curly fro hair, and it used to be a lot longer. I cut it. But I also used to wear braids when I played volleyball. And so just the ignorance about what different hairstyles look like. My sister has a darker skin tone than me, and she had multiple comments made about her skin tone, about the relativity of her cleanliness because of her skin tone. Just disrespectful comment after disrespectful comment, after teachers saying things, inappropriate words, just ignorance about that as a whole, and going to administration and them saying that they were completely oblivious to the problem was the main consensus we got from that. Ariel, if you want to add to that with your experience.
Yeah, so just to summarize kind of what Gabby was saying about the survey, like she said, because the majority of our answers were from Brunswick, because that was our direct link in social media, we had a lot harder time reaching. Like, I reached out to presidents of clubs through social media, but of course, because the majority of people I know go to Brunswick, that's where the majority of our results came from. So it wouldn't, like she said, be a good sample size to compare across the schools. But I think that'd definitely be an interesting thing to look into. But yeah, Brunswick it has this environment where there's a lot more implicit racism, which makes it so much harder to identify and kind of address, because people either aren't even aware that they are racist. When you try to confront people about racism, especially people like teachers, that, there's that awkward line of what can I say to this teacher without getting in trouble, trying to stand up for yourself, especially with racism issues. And it's the whole well, I'm not racist, or they don't realize that their behavior is racist and there's nothing you can really do about it. And in Brunswick, it kind of is your responsibility. As much as Gabby and I wish it wasn't our responsibility as students, it's kind of, you have to look out for yourself. And if you want to address racism, it's your responsibility as a minority to stand up for yourself, because no one else is going to stand up for you. My second day at Brunswick High School, we had an evacuation. And my brother, he's fully biologically related to me, yet he has much lighter skin than me and looks white to most people. On my second day of school, I wasn't allowed to leave with him because I was told there's no way we could be siblings. I was told that I was lying. I had a text from my mom saying I had permission to go home with him. And at that moment, I knew, I was like, this is going to be the next 3 years, constant justification of who you are, constantly having to defend yourself, and constantly having to remind yourself that you're not a threat and that you're not what everyone else sees you as.
I'm so sorry you guys have to deal with that. And thank you guys so much for sharing your stories. It really means a lot. Camille Bell, I see you have your hand up. Did you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. young people, I am so absolutely incredibly amazed by you all. Thank you for your work. Like, and when I see you, I see like future leaders and politicians and presidents, and I see all of this in you. I am a school principal. I'm just here to tell you, folks know. Okay. I think that this work that you're doing is wonderful. I think this presentation to this committee is incredibly important. And it kind of gives some context to the reason why there is such a committee here and what the adults can do as you've handed off all of this wonderful, rich information to, you know, push and move this work forward from an adult perspective, because there is a recognition that there is an issue. I'm not from Frederick. I've had the same exact experiences. So adults of color, we have the same, we go through the same things. And I think it's just at this point, it's important to figure out how do we make a difference and how do we make it work? So I'm extremely pleased and proud to see you all doing what you're doing and being so steadfast about what you're doing, and being very proud and relentless about the work. I'm very new on this committee. I am like literally 10 minutes old. So I am like excited, like listen, I am like literally moved to tears tonight. And as soon as you all are gone, like just give me some assignments. I am ready. Thank you. You have completely inspired me tonight. I'm glad it was this night that you did this and not like last month when I did it. So thank you. You all have just completely re-energized my purpose.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And David, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I'd start by just, I really stand with the other committee members in commending your work. Just, the way that you're approaching racism in FCPS in this systemic way in looking at policies, I think gives us a lot of tools on how to improve the system. You also did not lose sight of the programmatic side around the cultural months and support groups that I think can have, that can be uplifting for individual students. And I think that's very important as well. I think I have two questions. One is about the support group. I don't, I could be wrong. I don't think you had mentioned that when you had presented I think the last couple slides were new, and I don't know that you had mentioned those when you met with the executive committee. And so, I think my question on that is, do you feel like that kind of support group offered some good solidarity for you guys on the call and others who you know? Did it offer you guys some good solidarity?
Okay, do you want to start, Ariel, or do you want me to start?
You can go ahead.
Okay, so I want to start by saying that support group has been a project that we've been trying to do, and it took us about 3 months to get into action. We were moving, we were trying from the original, proposal of the idea. There was immediate, we don't know if we can do this. What does this look like? You guys need to come up with a plan. It was very, gritting your teeth, trudging through, trying to get it in play. And then after trying to explain to them, there was some type of miscommunication, but explaining how this group is not supposed to be connected to Minority Essence. It shouldn't be Minority Essence's support group. It needs to be connected to the school. This needs to be an action that the school is, taking full responsibility and accountability for, in realizing their problem. Here's a project that we are suggesting and giving to you to support us. And after that came up, about 2 months in trying to get this project started, it was about another month of going back and forth, like, oh, we didn't know this was a thing. This is going to have to happen. I need to talk to, this higher up. We're working with our social worker and our guidance counselor, one of the guidance counselor, to provide a group. So it ended up being categorized as a group under our social worker. As far as its merits, we would say that we learned that what we needed was not as so much as a support group, but an affinity group where students and teachers who've had common experiences can come together and discuss and talk about their feelings. We tried to state, we were like, we definitely want other leaders, but we would prefer that our main leader be a person of minority. Our Black guidance counselor, we wanted her to be, the main person. However, it was said that we cannot do that because we weren't allowed to discriminate in that type of sense. We tried to explain that it was this kind of similar way of, in a health class where you separate the boys and the girls for a certain discussion. It's the same type of thing, and how we were definitely not opposed for other people being in that group. We actually welcomed it. However, it was stated where we couldn't do that. So we found that it was very difficult at times to fully relate to our leader and what she was saying and how she was responding to some of our stories, guilt, kind of white guilt tripping in a way, and some of the things not obviously intentionally, but also not intentional about not doing it, and just understanding our perspectives. Ariel, if you want to go over that a little bit more.
Yeah, so from my understanding, the biggest reason why it couldn't be a minority was because of the qualifications that made it a support group. So we kind of just went into it with this idea of like, we want a group where minorities can talk about things, where we can be educated and like, what are our rights? What do we do in these situations? How do I go through life when, like, how do I talk to police officers? How do I feel safe in the world? And we wanted to get those resources, and we wanted it to be from the school, like Gabby said. We literally handed them this project and was like, here, like, you can do this for us. We've already set it all up for you. However, it got turned into like a social work kind of therapy group, which wasn't really what we wanted, because like dealing with racism isn't really like a mental illness. Not that that's all that support groups are for, but it just wasn't really what we were expecting. And that's why it had to be led by our social worker, was because she was the only one qualified to lead a support group. However, because it was classified as therapy, we had to get permission slips signed by our parents, and that deterred so many people from joining our group, because they were like, well, I don't want to be in therapy. I don't want to like all this stuff. Like, and it was like, that wasn't the point of the group. It wasn't supposed to be treatment. It wasn't supposed to be like something that you needed permission necessarily to be in because of the level of the kind of help that it was. It was mainly just supposed to be a place where minorities could talk about their experiences without being judged. They could feel connected to other minorities, because being in a predominantly white school is very isolating for minorities. And then having a leader who understands and who can provide resources for those students. So definitely the idea was there, and we appreciated that, the school was working with us to get this. However, it just wasn't really the end goal that we were looking for. And we definitely think if we made it an affinity group, got rid of the therapy aspect, and had minorities, we had our SRO, who is a minority, and he was very helpful in telling us, like, from the legal issues that we asked about, all that kind of stuff, like helping us know what to do in certain situations. So I think if we handled it with that kind of approach rather than the way it ended up this year, it could definitely be very beneficial.
I think you raised really good points on the value of it being an affinity group. I don't want to. I have one second question, but Keisha, do you see anybody else's hand up? I don't want to monopolize.
I don't. So if someone's hand is up, speak up. Otherwise, David, continue.
Okay. I guess the second thing I've been thinking about is I think it's essential that that all 7 board of education members here see your report and hear from you. I think there's 3 manners in which that can be done, and certainly I intend to share the Google Drive and the report that you've sent. I'm going to encourage all 7 of us to watch the recording. But I think the third question or the third way, and I know at least a couple of you are graduating soon, but the third way would be for you to speak directly or present directly at a Board of Education meeting. And I guess I'm wondering, how you would feel about that, if you have thought, if you would welcome that, or how you would feel about that.
So I know for me personally, as a senior, I am graduating. I'm in the middle of exams right now, taking AP exams. So personally, for me, I would definitely need it to be at least after after seniors are let out of school for FCPS, which I'm pretty sure is May 25th. And then after graduation, as I am personally still going to be working with Minority Essence. People can email me or text me or whatever it needs to be next year. So I wouldn't be opposed to presenting another time for, in sometime in June, sometime in that summertime, whenever it may be open. However, I just needed to be very clear on when is that happening, and understanding that, at least personally for me, I'm graduating, so I'm leaving FCPS, and we're passing this on to our next group. So yeah, that would be my personal thing.
Yeah, I would be, like I said, I'd be happy to help. I don't are we allowed to after we graduate? How does that work? And also, I'd need a date and specific details about it in order to commit.
Yeah, you bring up valid points. I think I'll be back in touch by email. But yeah, thank you.
Angela and Jacob, would you guys be interested as well?
I'd be more than willing. I'm not graduating, so as long as it's after, like next week is when AP exams finish up. So anything after that I can do.
I echo Angela's statement exactly.
Okay, any last questions? Okay, and again, I just want to thank you all. You guys did an amazing job again, and we definitely are going to be, looking at your work and your recommendations around policies, because a lot of them do align with some of the ideas and topics that we're focusing on. So it's really great to sort of have your perspective and hear your stories, and it's just really, as Camille said, just reinvigorates the work we're doing and the why. So we just really appreciate you guys taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to turn things over to David Bass.
Yeah, thank you. A few updates. Right, so I was not with you for the previous meeting, but I watched the recording, and yeah, really a lot of the SRO questions that you generated in the meeting were similar to questions that I was thinking about and submitted before our March 24th meeting. So I'm encouraged that I believe later in this meeting or going forward that Racial Equity Committee is going to be putting together a public comment on SROs. And I'm looking to continue to see the right ways to analyze this program and to get more data on SROs. A few other updates. I think that one area that I continue to look at that was in one of my slides last month, and then had been a discussion point at a board meeting in March. But the board does have a goal around hiring data, that the diversity of our staff will match the diversity of our students and our community by 2025. And this is an area that I want to continue to highlight, because in part because of my fears that we may not reach that goal by 2025. And so I want to continue to highlight that. In our most recent board meeting, I actually, in light of this being Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, actually, I highlighted the staff diversity in terms of Asian staff members is less than 1% of our current staff, while our student population is about 5%. So that is one of many examples where we have a ways to go in terms of the staff population matching our students and our communities. I want to continue in terms of policy committee and upcoming policies for review. The final agenda for our next policy committee has not been set. Once it is, I will send out the policies we're reviewing to our leadership here. But I'm also going to follow up with, I think, some of our subcommittee leaders here in the next tomorrow or Friday to ensure that every policy that you've brought forward for review, that it matches up with my notes. I want to ensure that I have forwarded each and every policy to policy committee, and that we can get this on the agenda relatively soon. Really in the next, relatively soon. Third thing I wanted to bring up is, I'm going to start scheduling some community conversations to connect with more people and more organizations. I have a list actually of community organizations and nonprofits that have a specific working relationship with FCPS, and so these are some of the organizations that I'm going to be reaching out to, kind of along the lines, or at least the way I framed it, is office hours, but I feel like community conversations has a better sound to it. But if there are organizations that you'd like to see me holding these office hours with, please let me know. I think I'd like to be doing this monthly, and ideally, I'd like to be, doing. I had some thoughts of, were there ways to do this online, and I didn't set that up. So I'm with COVID numbers being, thank goodness, far better now, looking to do these in person about monthly going forward. I'll be in I'll be in touch. So a fourth thing, I'm going to be in touch with our executive committee leadership, because each committee is now being asked, at what time are we going to consider meeting in person again? And so we'll, as a committee, we should begin thinking about when is the time that we want to start meeting in person again, which, has, I may have advantages and disadvantages, but I think has advantages in terms, I think has advantages in terms of seeing folks together in person. And I'm looking forward to that, but I'll work with our committee leadership on when the right time is for that. Yeah, I think the final thing, and it doesn't directly relate to board work. It was actually in my my job outside of the board that a colleague kind of sent me information on this webinar. But yeah, I think I just want to note that earlier today I was on a webinar that that one of the departments at Harvard had put together about the Tulsa massacre in 1921, where a very, very large segment of the Black community in Tulsa was massacred. And I knew some about this, but I feel I learned a lot from this webinar, and I may be putting out some more information on my Facebook page. It looks like PBS did an excellent documentary on the Tulsa massacre, and we're coming up on the 100-year anniversary of that. And so I may look to put out some more information on that on my Twitter and on my Facebook page. So yeah, that concludes my report. Are there any questions?
Hi, David. I just have one. Did the Board of Education talk yet about when board meetings might become open? More importantly, when would people be able to come and offer public comment at 6 p.m.? And would board meetings be going back to 6 p.m. like it was prior COVID-19 times?
Yeah, John, thank you for raising that. And I know, I don't know that I've said this publicly, but I'm certainly aware that the 2 p.m. time does not allow most working folks to come and offer public comment. So yes, the board is looking at this, and we're looking to implement the normal schedule, the prior to COVID schedule, very soon. I honestly am trying to remember whether it is going to be for this very next meeting or for the first meeting in June, but in very short time, we're looking to get back to the afternoon work session and then the meeting with the public comment at 6 p.m. And so if, it's likely for the first meeting in June, but possibly even for the meeting next week. Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. I just wanted to mention for Jacob, Ariel, and Gabby, I know it's a busy time with AP exams and everything, so you guys are welcome to stay, but if you have to drop, we understand and wouldn't be offended. Angela is one of our new members, so she's stuck with us. Okay. Can we move to the next slide, Dawn? Okay, and I am going to turn things over to Dr. Harris, who just wanted to get some feedback from the committee on some planning for next school year.
Good evening, everyone. And for our new members whom I have not yet had a chance to meet, I apologize that I was late this evening. I was attending one of the two best graduations of the year for FCPS earlier this week, when yesterday I attended the graduation for the Success Program, and then this evening I attended the graduation for Rock Creek. And so those are always outstanding and amazing graduation ceremonies to kick off the season. But I am Keith Harris, as you see on the screen, the Executive Director for Accelerating Achievement and Equity. And under this department, we have responsibilities for special education, English learners, for gifted and talented, or advanced academics, we call it, and then also for the work of equity within our school system. And so with the feedback that I wanted to spend just a few minutes with the Racial Equity Committee, we recognize that all of us, students have not been comprehensively in school since last March. And so staff is feverishly planning for a robust summer program, and then also planning for what our return to school will look like, both for 5-day-a-week face-to-face option, but then also a virtual option for students as well. And so more information about those things are coming out. And as a matter of fact, over the course of our next several board meetings, we'll be talking more about each of these plans coming up. And so I know the next board meeting, we'll talk about our robust summer plans for students for unfinished learning and just to accelerate students' learning and opportunities. But as we are making plans for next school year, what we really want to do is get the voice of a greater, larger public than those within the school system. And so I would like to get feedback not only from this committee, the Racial Equity Committee, but I'm also getting feedback from other stakeholder groups, such as special education groups, such as our English learner community partners, because I want to make sure that as I am in meetings, as our school system staff are in meetings and we're making decisions, that we're not doing so from our limited perspective as being entrenched in the school system and not really considering the larger context and perspective of those whom we serve, namely our families, our students, our community partners, because you all have a lens as well that we just don't want to miss in making decisions. And so I really have two general questions this evening, and that may lead into a couple of follow-up questions. And I know there are several other agenda items on tonight, and so if I do not get to you, please put your comments in the chat box. And as we go forward with the meeting, I'm going to make sure I capture those comments so I can have those in my notes for conversations and decision making in the school system. So the first question that I want to ask and just get some feedback from you all on is, as we consider our students' return for next year and our planning for it, from a racial equity lens, the question is, what are your concerns for students next year? Just that general question. What are your concerns for students next year? I'm Lola. For some reason, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, there you go.
I'm new to this committee, so I apologize if I'm not following protocol. I think the concern that I have is that students have not had an appropriate conversation regarding the events of 2020, some of the social injustice occurrences and the larger discourse that has happened has not really occurred in the school system in a way that I think is appropriate. And so my concern would be that they would sort of be reintroduced to the school full time without an appropriate discussion of those issues. And so that's one of my concerns.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Anusa?
Hi, I'm new to this committee as well. I actually was appointed as a student like last week or so. So I'm really excited to be here. So I want to thank you all for having me. But I feel like we should also facilitate conversations along with just the social injustice issues, also talking about like the Asian American issues going on right now as well. Because I definitely saw as a student in middle school last year, because I'm in ninth grade this year, I definitely saw in my middle school as well, along with high schools, there was definitely a lot of jokes being passed around about COVID-19, etc., especially directed towards Asian students. And excuse me, although it was there were statements put out by schools and by I believe also Frederick County regarding the hate crimes that happen towards Asian Americans. I feel like we should also not only facilitate the conversation about that, but we should also, I feel like in a lot of ways that was also denounced as an issue that wasn't necessarily based off of what COVID-19. So we should I feel like that's something we should focus on, facilitating conversations about the Asian American issues before and after COVID-19, because I definitely did see issues before that definitely got swept under the rug. And it's unfortunate to think that just because somebody, like, there are crimes being committed, etc., that this is now a conversation. So definitely facilitating, just an environment where we all understand that these are issues that we need to bring up without violence need to be introduced first.
Okay. Thank you for that. Serena.
Hi, everyone. I agree with Anusha. I was going to speak about access and the resources needed for our Asian students, but I'll just go further into I'm concerned about the mental health services, specifically for students of color, as we transition back into in-person work, especially with everything that's happened in the past year, almost two, since we were fully in person. So I think that there just needs to be a lot of mental health services, specifically for students of color, catering to them, also being aware of like the cultural stigmas around mental health and how we're going to address that. We just heard about what happened with the support group, with the other groups. So we have to keep all of those concerns into mind when we do this. But yeah, that's my biggest concern.
Thank you. Ivania.
I want to just bring up, and I'm sure that this is something that you guys are already discussing, but as a parent coming from going through this right now, I want to make sure that there's an emphasis on the gap that's probably been widened, especially with minority populations, because, for example, my daughter I know fell back. She actually fell below grade level during this year, and I know that was a lot of students. But we know, based on data, that these are the students, the same population of students that are later in life or later in school are going to have issues in terms of reaching opportunities. I want to make sure that those students are adequately supported, specifically our immigrant populations, our ESL students, and any minority population that needs that additional attention, just so that we're not widening that gap even more.
Thank you. Yeah. Hi, Constance.
Hi, I'm new to the committee, so thank you for having me. So my concern is twofold, because I also have a student. I have a child at in FCPS, so I am concerned about the attention to mental health, the impact that COVID has had on our students in general, and how the teachers may hopefully will be taught or learned or included in the curriculum, the trauma that the students have experienced, and a sensitivity to how they will transition back into hopefully what would look like a fairly normal school experience, but with the understanding that many of them have been traumatized, many who did not have mental illnesses or depression or moods that really impacted their daily living, that they do now. And that should be addressed, and hopefully it will be. And that is a big concern of mine. Also, I agree that we have to remember that the students in a virtual learning have some have regressed, but I'm concerned that the assumption that once the children return, I mean, everyone's going to have the ability to kind of transition back into this structured environment with the demands of, having to engage and complete work at a certain level. And the knowledge that some of our families with lack of supports and resources maybe some of those students didn't have the ability or the parents to sit by them, to support them at home, the resources to support them at home, to be aware of that, but also not to be so quick to assume that there was a backslide if there wasn't enough of an opportunity to get that support. Not blaming the families at all, but understanding the complexities, particularly with the immigrant family, on what that might have looked like for these students learning virtually.
Thank you for that. Heather.
Hi, I'm new to this group as well. Thank you for having me. Constance literally said what was on my mind. And so just to add to what she was saying, I would hope that there would be some flexibility in how we go back into our learning environments. I think if we try to jump back and do what we did before COVID, that would be a mistake, because these children have gone through something that none of us have ever gone through. And we can't dismiss that, and we can't belittle that, and we can't minimize the different layers of trauma that they have experienced and that educators have experienced, everyone has experienced. And so I would hope that there would be a little bit of looking outside of the box and being able to look at things and see how we can truly meet the needs of our students and our families without the same expectations of the way we always did it before, simply because of what we've been through as a nation on so many levels. And so that's my biggest concern. I am an elementary school teacher, and I've been virtual since last March. And I have students that have missed the entire year. So to sit them in a classroom with the same expectations that they had before would be such a disservice for them. So that is my concern coming as an educator.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gabrielle, you're hanging on with us.
Yeah, I was interested. I've never been to one of these meetings, so I said I was here. I decided to stay. I would say that to just be aware of students who, because it is still an option, because COVID has not fully left the world, that, to stay virtual, the people who are still reluctant, who, have at-risk students, so they're deciding to keep them home, that there's not a stigma or a notch against them because they're not coming to school. The assignments that they're doing, the way that they're being taught, that they're not put to the side because it's like, oh, well, I have students in my classroom now, as well as support for the teachers, because this is something that they have never had to do before, especially if we're going to go back into, 5 days a week. They're going to need support and flexibility and just grace. Everyone's just going to need a huge level of grace and just figuring out what next year and the years to come are going to look like. So making sure, that our students virtually who decide to stay virtual get the same level of education as the students who decide to go back to school fully, and that teachers get support throughout that, so they're not put to blame or discouraged throughout the school year.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Keisha?
All right, kind of building off what Heather said, I think the flexibility is really important. Just like, these are children, and I feel like in the adult world, as we're having, I've been working from home full time for the past year plus, and we're having conversations about like, what's it going to look like? Are people going in? And as adults, it's hard enough. People have gotten used to like not having commutes and all that kind of stuff. And so even thinking about as adults sort of transitioning back is stressful. So I can only imagine it's like tenfold for children. And so going from the schedule they have now to 5 days a week is going to be like a rude awakening. So there really is the need for flexibility and kind of thinking about that and having grace for everyone, especially at the beginning, as everyone's trying to figure out how to get back to normal. And I think there's like a lot of learnings that we shouldn't miss. So I think, again, it is wrong to try to say, let's just go back and do how we did things. And I think we have things on both sides of the spectrum. So we talked a lot about people who don't have the support for virtual learning, and not pointing any fingers, but they're struggling because of that. On the other hand, I've seen people who had struggled at school and have now like excelled over a virtual model, both in my household and like just talking to other people. And so my kid, who is like an amazing student, is struggling like nobody's business. And my kid, who I used to have to badger every 5 minutes, is like a straight A student. It's like they completely swapped. And so also realizing that kids learn differently and some succeed, and how we can learn from that, just to think about building things forward, because I think we can better serve all our children that way, of thinking about all the different ways they learn, all the different ways they excel, and making sure we're building in opportunities for people to to be the best them they can be.
Thank you. Angela.
Hi, I just wanted to also add that I think we should give additional consideration to students who are making a transition either from elementary school to middle school or middle school to high school, because that transition is already hard enough in person. And I can imagine that after going a whole year virtually, it can be really difficult, especially if it's like feeder schools and you're seeing a bunch of new people all at once. That could be a little bit traumatic for students.
Thank you for that. Let me ask another question. And you already started sharing some of this, but what supports do you feel we should put in place to help students be successful next year? So I heard supports relative to the trauma that students have experienced, and some other things. So what are some other things? And so Lola, I saw your hand go up, and then Gabrielle.
Oh, it wasn't intentional. Sorry.
Okay, all right. Gabrielle, did your hand shoot back up?
Not yet, but I do have something. I would say I think the student support time that was allotted in the schedule, I know for me, definitely helped me. That just after school aspect, especially if you're going to stay virtual, I think that's vital, because you're able to talk to that teacher either one-on-one, or if there are other people in the class. I think our at least for my teachers, they did it really well, just making sure that everyone was attended to and any questions that you had were answered. But yeah, I think that having that allotted time where students can come in and ask their questions, if the schedule might be a little shorter, the time didn't work in their favor, internet connection went out, all of that stuff can be mitigated with that support time.
Thanks. Anisha.
So something I feel like we should do is not only like obviously having our guidance counselors and school psychiatrists there, but also like expressing to students that they're also a resource in case, like, obviously there are a lot of students who probably lost family members due to COVID-19. So basically promoting them as also like grievance count, like you can go to them if you need any type of grievance help, or like also potentially starting like an actual support group for students who need like not necessarily full-on grievance counseling, but they would want somebody to talk to, and like just having that like lower level of like, I understand that for some students there is like a stigma around like therapy and stuff like that. However, I guess feel like advertising that to students and also telling them that this isn't necessarily that something is wrong with you. You just need a little bit of help to alleviate those stresses that come with grieving and then like getting over a loss like that. And then also like promoting to students that like come to your guidance counselors if you're having trouble with moving back from virtual to normal learning, because I definitely, as like a freshman as well, this is my first year of high school and like all of it was virtual. So like to change my work style from how it is now to like actually integrate it back into how we had like high school before, I feel like definitely promoting to guidance counselors that we need that kind of help to give students to like get back into that and provide guidance for how they can shift back into like that mindset they had before.
Thank you for that. Neil.
Hi, Dr. Harris. The one of the things that comes to my mind immediately would be some type of like SEL program that's external from the district that would allow us to have additional support bodies if we cannot find teachers or folks that are available on our staff. We used to use them in other places that I was involved with that would just were able to do relief, and they had programs, and they were like mental health programs, but they were also, you know, they were also academic programs, intervention programs, and they were very helpful in terms of providing targeted support. I mean, I was sitting and watching another meeting looking at math, particularly like math and reading intervention for our students. I think as a district, we just need to do a better job. That's amazing. We need to do a better job of looking at how we service our RL students. I just don't feel like district-wide we have enough folks on hand to do the work that needs to be done effectively. So just kind of thinking about our recruiting efforts in those areas. And I don't know what they look like. I have zero insight on that, but I think we may need to think about that. Just thinking about the presentation that we received earlier this evening, also looking at our recruitment efforts overall as a school district. I don't know what our target is in terms of where we are trying to recruit folks of color, but I mean, if we're going to recruitment fairs and we're stopping, let's say, DC or Virginia, we may need to think about going to North Carolina and South Carolina and such, where the dollar that is offered in Frederick looks like a big dollar versus going into an area where the dollar that's offered in Frederick looks like a small dollar. So just thinking about that, because it's not the compensation is not competitive. So if you are sitting in a room with a number of different school districts who are intentionally recruiting folks of color, clearly they're going to go to the districts with the bigger dollar. So I was just thinking about that after listening to the presentation, and just offering several opportunities for students to decompress, and just thinking about that in master scheduling, because in master scheduling, I mean, particularly in my master schedule, it is so tight with so many different curricular areas that I have to present for children. Just thinking about making sure that we have time, that children have time to sit down and talk to one another and have that face-to-face and get back and learn how to interact with one another face-to-face. Are the things that I have literally seen bringing students back 4 days a week. We're trying to, teach some very basic skill again about being a student. When you are a kindergarten student and you're learning, how to be a kindergartner at home and you're flipping off your bed, it's very different than when you have to sit down and learn some routines and rituals. So we have to think about giving students that opportunity, that socialization, and building that time for it to intentionally do that work, where before you need to do it, just go see the counselor. Now we need to do that work intentionally.
Thank you. I see 3 more hands, and then we're gonna move on because I know you still have a lot to do on this agenda and a little time. So Andrea, I saw you put something in the chat box, but I saw your hand raised, and then Avanya, and then Heather.
Yes, thank you. And welcome to all of our new committee members. But yes, I want to echo what Camille said about our children in terms of being able to connect with each other, not just academically, but socially. Especially those who still might choose the virtual model when the fall semester starts. Right now, my son, who is an only child, complains that, he sits on the computer and he communicates with his classmates and they talk about the lesson, but there is no opportunity to connect outside of that. Sometimes there are a few teachers who allow them to play these virtual reality games. And so that allows him to decompress a little bit. But I think that we also have to remember that our children are also human. So yes, we want them to learn, but also we want them to learn how to play again with each other, to connect socially. And so I think that's very important.
Thank you. Avanya?
Thank you. I also want to piggyback off of what Camille was saying a little bit. I would encourage some type of summer bridge programming. I know that there is some type of maybe summer enrollment that usually happens, especially when students are transitioning from, elementary to middle school or middle school to high school, whatever. But really, if there are students where maybe they fell behind a little bit during the school year, some type of a summer bridge program to get them prepared and a little bit more acclimated over, and I guess making that on a larger scale. So making that opportunity available. The other thing that I wanted to piggyback also was allowing for the resources, like outside resources, community-based organizations or organizations in general, like FCC. I used to have presentations that were happening in person. I don't know what that looks like coming back. I don't know if that's going to get phased in, but really remembering that a lot of those organizations and allies were supports for our students, and trying to phase them back in quickly would be helpful, specifically for specific populations, and also having those opportunities, still virtual. The last thing I wanted to mention very quickly was everybody's talking about extending the supports like social trauma, rental assistance, whatever's going on to the student, to students, but also thinking about our families and knowing that the families also need that additional support. So really preparing our community liaisons or some other, maybe more than community liaisons, because there's going to be a lot of need as students transition back into the school systems. And the families are going to have a lot of needs. Maybe they're still not working. Maybe they still need assistance. They still need help navigating. So just thinking also about not only the students, but the whole family support that is the structure that's needed.
Heather.
Really quickly, on top of everything else that was mentioned, students will definitely need academic support. One of the things that was really good about this virtual learning was the ability for teachers to tutor their students online. I know before you really couldn't tutor your own student, and it couldn't be in the school, and there were all these standards put into place, but being able to talk to your students through the Google Meet for some extra academic support would be really good, as well as, a gradual release type schedule for these students, just because of the fact they haven't been in school for so long. I know in high school, there's like a connect moment or like class, but there's nothing like that in elementary school. If there could be something like that where they get that extra academic support built into their day or into the week, I think that would be helpful as well.
Thank you. And then Keisha Dawn popped her hands up, so I will leave it to you. And Dawn, if you have a quick comment, and then Keisha, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, go ahead, Dawn.
I am super quick. I just wanted to put out there that I know some schools have community liaisons, and Avanya made me think of this. I am at a school that currently does. I would think that would be something to also consider when supporting our students and our families, especially transitioning in. I don't know what the budget looks like for FCPS, and if there is a way to include more community liaisons in schools to be that bridge between home and school. But I think that would be a very important decision for FCPS to make.
Thank you. I really appreciate this quick feedback, and I did see that some folks put some things in the chat box, and so I'll go back and capture those things as well. But this is some very valuable information for us to lend and include and consider as we're making some plans. So thank you all so much for this time. Yeah.
And thank you for asking for this kind of input. We appreciate it. Don, can you go to the next slide? Okay, I'm going to keep this and the next couple things really short, so hopefully we can get through a few committee reports and maybe only be like 5 minutes over if people have an extra 5 minutes in their day. But again, even when we put these slides together, we weren't sure if we'd have our new members in place. Kudos, we do, and we actually have 8 of the 9 folks who are actually present today. So I apologize that we had a packed agenda, as you see, so I didn't have the chance for everyone to sort of do introductions. I am going to read names, even though they've been very engaged. So we've heard their names, and make sure that at our next meeting we do introductions of the whole committee so that everyone can get to know each other. But our new members are, Camille Bell, Paul Cabell, Heather Christensen, Constance De La Vega, Lola Fashoyan Ajay, sorry if I mispronounced your name, Mason Hill, Anusha Khan, Angela Miller, and Ruben Rosario. So we want to welcome you to the committee. We had 56 applicants we had a lot of very qualified people. So it was a tough process. We're really excited to have you guys and your new energy here, because you guys all have amazing backgrounds and very diverse backgrounds. And we just are really excited to have those different perspectives on the committee. And we can already see from today's meeting that you guys are all engaged. So we're really excited to have you guys here. I'm in the middle of scheduling a new member meeting, probably for sometime either next week or the following week, just to kind of orient everyone, sort of talk about how we work and, talk about the different opportunities to serve within the committee. So I'm going to schedule it based on the new member availability, but I will also invite kind of all committee members. So if folks are, available and want to attend, they can. And then, like I said, at our next whole meeting, I'll make sure to include introductions for all committee members, so everyone sort of has a general sense of who's who. So that's that. And Dawn, thank you. And you can, I feel like these slides stayed on from last time. So can you move forward, please? One more. Yeah, so at our last committee meeting, we reviewed the Board of Education SRO presentation and a portion of the question and answer. And then we had our own discussion of sort of our questions that remained based on that and things that we wanted to continue to learn. So based on the questions that we came up with as a committee, I started drafting a public comment to share at next week's Board of Education meeting. The goal is really this: when the SRO presentation happened, it was informational. So sorry, school resource officers. Sorry about that. We just want to make sure that the conversation continues, because we really think it's important to continue to have that conversation of how the program is being measured and how success is being defined and all that kind of stuff. So again, I've drafted it based on the conversation that we had as a committee, but I'm going to send it out to everyone tomorrow so that you guys can review. And if there's any questions that I've left out or anything that you want to add, feel free to do that. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that was one thing about public comments. Kudos to Dawn, who actually provided a public comment at last week's Board of Education meeting regarding Policy 516. I'm just really reiterating the components of that policy that we think are really important to think through as that policy is being implemented, that have been brought up by various subcommittees who are doing work related to that. And again, we were also going to make a public comment about the inconvenient time of public comments, but happy to hear from David that that's something that's in the process of happening, of switching the time so that, it's a time that more working adults could make. And just want to quickly note that annual elections for our committee are coming up. So that'll be like the July meeting. And so stay tuned for more information. I clearly have only been on board for a couple of months, but Dawn and Elisa have both been serving us for a long time. So, we will kind of have additional information about that coming up soon. Next slide, please. And now I'm hoping that we can quickly go through some of the subcommittee reports. So next slide. So whoever is representing the hiring, recruitment, retention, and professional development of staff subcommittee. And just one note for our new members, a lot of the work we do in terms of like reviewing policies and making recommendations is done through our subcommittees. And so we have a couple of subcommittees who are going to be presenting today based on the work that they've been doing. And we have additional subcommittees, but when we have our new member meeting in the coming weeks, that's what we'll be talking about too. Like, what are the opportunities for subcommittees so that you guys can join that? Because that's a lot of where the work is happening. So who is a representative for this committee?
I think it's just me, Shanita. So this will be very quick because we don't have any new updates. So if you push to the last slide was really around what our next steps were going to be. And our next steps were to get some additional information and data from the central office. That information we do have. So our next steps are to meet as a subcommittee, look through all of the feedback, put it in a format, and we look to present at a future meeting with any recommendations that we'll have.
Perfect. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Next slide, Dawn. And who's representing the School Climate and Discipline Subcommittee?
Hi, I will. Okay, so in terms of the summary of our work, and please pardon me for reading. It's been a minute since we've looked at this initially. But after looking at the data, we identified inequities in disciplining among the following groups as it related to suspensions and expulsions. So we saw inequities with African Americans, recipients of free and reduced lunches, and special ed students. We were particularly concerned with the number of suspensions for children pre-K through 5th grade. I also want to acknowledge, pardon me, the other members of this group, David, Serena, and Ivania. Please feel free to chime in if I've left something out. We were also unclear of the guidelines or protocols schools were using to determine suspensions and expulsions, and will request to see those. Secondly, we reviewed policies 403 around student discipline, policy 437, bullying, harassment, intimidation, and policy 444, educational equity and excellence. 3, we reviewed the regulation for suspension and expulsion. We would like to see language more reflective of restorative practices with an emphasis on proactive measures to prevent conflict, as opposed to reactive measures that emphasize discipline over consequences. And then as a committee, we would like the opportunity to be more proactive as issues arise in the community. And we have the question, is there more we can do than we are currently doing? So, basically after we had looked at the data, we asked ourselves, so what? What do we do now? What role can we play beyond the committee in terms of our activism? So David, Serena, Ivania, do you have anything else to add?
It has been good, but I think it's good so far. Good.
Okay, great, because it's going to be your turn with this next one. Other people will get to talk. Some of the pressure will be off of me. All right.
Okay.
So I think the next slide has to do with policies, and I'm crossing my fingers that the link works and that we're able to open. So David, I think you were responsible for policy 403. We worked with you to edit that. So let's see if this link works. Oh. So the links.
See if.
Okay, there we are. Thank you so much.
Okay. I don't know that I put in new information on policy 403. We can.
So if we scroll down, yeah.
Okay.
Well, we spent quite a bit of time on this one, I thought.
Yeah. So I would also say I don't know that I've looked at this since our meeting in March. And yeah, sure. Do you want to scroll up or back to page 1? Yeah. Right. So, I mean, we're putting in some of the language around restorative practices here. But I think I will likely have more to say on this at a future meeting.
I'm going to make a quick recommendation based on us being out of time. And I know like a lot of folks, including my subcommittee, put together these slides like several months ago and we just didn't get to it. But if there's more you want to say, Andrea, feel free to right now. But I do think that we could sort of plan to spend the majority of our July meeting, which will be our next meeting, just on subcommittee updates, because we've had some really important discussions that we've had to have, but because of that, we've had less time to focus on this. So if anyone has any like burning updates right now, please bring them up. Otherwise, I think we should really plan to use the entirety or the majority of July's meeting to have subcommittees. And we can sort of like, use next month in June to make sure you're meeting with your subcommittee so we can have updates. Keith, we do have to give our board update in June, I believe. And so we do have some progress that we've made, and I will start pulling that together. But I just feel like we really, we do need to start working. And so I think we've had, meetings last month and this month, and just sort of using next month to get our using that time to work with your subcommittees and having report outs in July is going to be probably the most effective use of time. I do want to note, though, I know that the culturally inclusive subcommittee that I'm on with Tia and Elisa and Katie, and I feel like I might be missing someone, but I'm not. I'm sorry if I am. We have taken a stab at sort of updating policy 444, which is like the equity policy, because similarly to the students in the like minority essence committee, we thought that it is really important to have an overarching recommendation that's focused on anti-racism and equity and that sort of thing. And policy 444 is very vague, but probably the closest thing that we have to that. And so we thought it was really important just because in previous discussions, we know so many issues related to curriculum also have to do with like teacher training and have to do with recruitment, and everything's so interrelated. And so we thought it was really important to sort of think of a comprehensive equity policy just based on our review of, what other people are doing in terms of like curriculum and that sort of thing. And so it's something we're working on, but definitely want to invite other subcommittees and individuals who are interested in that as well to be involved. So if you're interested in sort of working on like thinking through recommendations based on that, please reach out to me so that we can sort of coordinate that over the next month or so. So I just want to throw that out there.
Hey, Keisha, it's Tia. Real quick, I know you mentioned a meeting for our new members. At that meeting, will we be getting everyone up to speed in terms of the work that the subcommittees are doing and where we stand with different policy revisions? Is that part of it?
It'll be like talking about what subcommittees exist. I could like David, I know you said you're going to be reaching out to folks, so it would be helpful if you could, and I think you usually do, but sort of copy me on that just so I can be clear on like the status of each committee, especially as we're pulling together our report for the board. So we may be able to, depending on if we have statuses, but we'll definitely be talking about the subcommittees. And if there are, if there is a certain status or if people can send something, I think that would be helpful to include as well.
Okay, yeah. I'm just thinking, obviously many of us joined when this committee was brand new and nothing had been done. So it just could be helpful to the new members to know, what we've done so far and where things stand, so they kind of know where they can jump in.
Yeah, and it would be great if we can try to get at least like one representative from each committee, and I think we probably can try to do that. So I think that's a great idea, Tia. Thank you for bringing that up. And I think, I think Camille raised her hand. Did you have a question or comment?
I just had a question. Are those the only two subcommittees that, or are there more? And
There's
then
more.
we'll be able to just determine where we would want to jump in and assist?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was going to jump in and say too. We were going to share the various subcommittees for those new members, and they would be able to see what we've done and get an idea of what each committee's mission is, so that they could see where they best fit.
Okay, any other questions related to that? Okay, so we do have to kind of present on our progress to the Board of Education in June. So we're going to start pulling that together, and then again, maybe reaching out to folks just to make sure that we're being comprehensive in all of our updates based on the progress of the various subcommittees. Dawn, do you have the date of what the next committee of the whole meeting would be in July?
July?
Yeah, for our committee.
For our committee, it is, I'm looking at it now. Not opening. It looks like July 21st.
I won't be here, so I don't, but if that date works for everyone else, I think maybe Elisa can run that meeting. I'll be out of the country that week.
That would be the third Wednesday, which is what we've been doing. So
yeah. So
okay.
Okay, so we can pen that in. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that, and so sorry, and I'll send out an email. We for new members, we always need to have our slides. I think it's 9 or 10 days before the meeting, because they have to be posted to Board Docs so the public can see them. And so we're going to work back from what that date is, just so that each of the subcommittees can update their slides by that date in preparation for the July meeting. And as I mentioned, we're going to use the majority of that meeting to do subcommittee updates. So we really want our subcommittees to use, this month, and then what would have been a meeting time in June next month to meet and make progress, and so that we can have updates for all of the subcommittees in July. And are there any other questions? And if not, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, guys.